I mean, what do we got, a contest here to see who can talk longer? I know, our group's more interesting than your group. I suggest that we all return to our places, regardless of how, that ought to do it. It's very compulsive. Oh, look, they even heard we were going to do it. They got up. I just want to see who can talk through an ohm. That's what I want to see. Yes. Yeah, I think we got a champion here. Maybe a little third race somewhere. Okay, well, look, I know it's been a demanding day, beginning with a lot of glamours, which we could probably relate to, and then going on to some very abstruse material. Now, tomorrow, we'll get practical again, although he says, it's still a very high thought what presented attributes is, but every one of us is under obligation to present an attribute or a quality or something, The Christ presented love, Buddha presented wisdom, Plato presented the synthesis of ideas, all of them second-ray souls, and with great presentations that have affected whole civilizations and hemispheres. Now, in our own little way, we have to see what we are actually presenting to the world in an individual manner and in a group manner. Yeah, Francis.
The first description of the second ray that you presented, which was pure wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll restate that. It's maybe worth it. A distinction between the first attribute of the second ray that you mentioned, which is, or aspect, which is wisdom, in which the Buddha incarnated.
Yeah.
The difference between that and the DK version, which is 2 sub 3. Yeah. What's the difference in that?
Between the Buddha knew it all, but he expressed the simplicity characteristic of Shambhala. That's what DK says. That simplicity will always lead to Shambhala. And he talked to a disciple of his who was a 6th-ray soul, changing to a 2nd-ray soul, but the man had a 1st-ray monad, almost obviously. And he said, you must write about Shambhala and write with simplicity, because simplicity will open the door to Shambhala. So when you really read the Buddha's work, or as it's been transcribed, it's not filled with the kind of complexity you find in DK. So although the Buddha was a 3rd-ray monad, he had somehow a 1st sub-ray on his soul. And he presented the kind of material that leads straight into Shambhala, says the Tibetan. Obviously, the Christ is pure love, and whatever attribute the Tibetan is presenting, he didn't make a great deal of it. He chose Plato instead, unless, of course, there's a connection. Because when you think about these interesting characters, Pythagoras, Plato, Socrates, you think about KH, you think about DK, the Neoplatonists, there's some continuity there, and I think DK is there. He's said to have been the first disciple of Pythagoras, a certain just Greek by the name of Cleinias. There is some material on him. He was called the just Greek, and he was the second in command to Pythagoras. So that's interesting, but then 300 years later, what happened? Who was Plato and who was Socrates? So we have to look at that in terms of the characters that we think we know about. I think there's a continuity there. So the reincarnational history will be interesting, but only after we overcome the sort of personalism that we tend to throw on that. When we look at the history of ideas, it's a different thing, and what qualities they're really presenting, Chuck. Yeah, or Eva.
Just wondering, those that appeared during that period with Plato and all the Grecian philosophers, were they not part of the Buddha's entourage, and they were reincarnated then later on
I think
in
so.
the Hellenistic
I think
time?
so. As a matter of fact, you kind of follow Master M, and you begin to think that he was Ashoka, the Buddhist emperor, who was a great warrior and converted to Buddhism, and then went on to convert everybody else, you know. And you kind of look at, I have a suspicion that Charlemagne was significant in terms of the people that we know, the great Holy Roman Emperor with his Christianity. You know, it's interesting about Akbar the Great, who was, of course, Master M. He had the six-pointed star. That was his sign on his buildings, which, of course, represents the monad, and the seal of Solomon, whom he was, you see? And he was very egalitarian. He had three major wives. One was Christian, one was Muslim, one was Jewish, Hebrew. And then, you know, 700 concubines or something like that. Busy guy, you know, busy. But anyway, he was his court was marvelous, and so was the court of Charlemagne. You know, in other words, and so was the court of Solomon. They opened up the court so that every true thinker and artist could come in and really express. They say that Akbar was illiterate, meaning that he couldn't read, but he could certainly think, you know. Yeah, so was there a question here, a thought? Yeah.
I just got a little lost when you went so fast. I think you were linking Moria to Akbar to Solomon.
Yes,
that's
right.
what I thought. Yeah,
that's
I just
right.
wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that's how the story goes. Solomon, Akbar, Moria. Yeah, and I'm even throwing in Charlemagne there for good measure, and a certain character called Russell M, who appears with Christ in the desert. The Christ is looking a bit blonde, and Russell M looks just like Moria, and Christ is putting his hand and his foot in the sand, and then some sort of diagram in the middle, and what came out of that is the new world will be built by human hands and human feet, according to the prophecy of the Christ, to which Russell M gave testimony. So we don't know the exact history. It'll be most interesting once we can get rid of our sort of, you know, personalism about them, to see what they really manifested in those days.
What Christ is that? Like Jesus?
No. Well, no, Jesus the Christ are two separate beings in this occultism, you know. So Jesus is the sixth ray master, now at Chohan, and Christ is the Lord Maitreya on the second ray, who overshadowed Jesus. While Jesus is taking the fourth degree, the Christ is taking the sixth degree. So it's a dual manifestation. So that would have been, you know, from the time of the baptism on, it's mostly Christ who is using the body of Jesus.
Right.
And when he threw the money changers out of the temple, I think Jesus got back in.
So the Christ that you're talking about with the RM.
Russell M.
Yeah, Christ is just Christ.
Well, it says Christ in the desert, something like that.
Christ in the desert.
Yeah. So it'll be most interesting, and of course, if we trace our own incarnations, they'd be rather dull, but you know, probably getting better as we go. Hopefully. Okay. Yeah.
It's a good thought that, you know, also DK says that a lot of the people you find yourself working with are being prepared for future work. And then you can trace that back, that probably all of us in this room have done something through several lives that has led up to this point in some sort of, whether mystery schools or whatever.
Yeah.
So it would be very interesting.
I think so, you know. But it will be interesting from the point of view of the study of energy more than the study of personality per se. You know, the lives of Alcyone or Alcyone, which is like the last 50 lives of Krishnamurti, is an interesting book. Maybe some of you have read it. I was really fascinated with it. I thought how very interesting where he showed up and all the rest. But DK criticized the book and said it was written strictly from the angle of personality and not from the angle of soul quality. Okay, so we want to study our incarnations from the point of view of the energies they manifest and where they're really going in terms of manifesting soul quality and the plan. Yes, yes. Yeah. Well, it's a good thing Michael's a Gemini. That's all I can say.
Could you comment on the energy stream of Jesus the Christ reincarnating as Apollonius of Tyana?
Yeah, I think I can comment on that because I think I figured it out. Well, you know, there was Joshua, son of Nun, and he fought the Battle of Jericho at the second degree and basically was a great warrior. Then there was Jeshua, who was the priest, Jeshua, and then there was Joshua, the high priest, probably where we had the third degree taken by Jesus. Then there was Yeshua, who was Jesus. Then there was a disciple by the name of Apollonius of Tyana, who was born even, what can I say, even before, he was born even before Jesus, I believe, and he lived afterwards. And yet we say that Jesus took the fifth initiation as Apollonius of Tyana. It's obviously a tulku phenomenon, meaning, again, that the disciple gives up his body to the master or higher initiate to use, rather than to have to be born as Apollonius of Tyana. So that's how I figure it, that Apollonius, as a disciple of Jesus, gave up his body, and Jesus took the fifth initiation in that vehicle. That's my guess. In the same way that, well, there's some interesting things. You know, we're told that John the Beloved, or something, he wrote the book of Revelation, and yet DK says he didn't. That it was dictated by the Master Hilarion, i.e. St. Paul, who was disembodied and overshadowing John. So, you know, all of these cooperations from the inside to the outside, if we don't know what they are, history looks a little confusing. If we know what they are, then we can explain certain things. Then there's St. Paul, who, I don't know if I got this right or not, but basically the Neoplatonists were pretty much the old fellows coming back. And it's quite possible that Plotinus was DK, and it's well asserted that Iamblichus was Hilarion. And so basically the fifth initiation is taken there by Iamblichus Hilarion, not St. Paul taking the fourth, but the fifth later as Iamblichus Hilarion, among the Neoplatonic group.
And he switched rays?
Well, now look, you know, here's the thing about St. Paul's rays. Very interesting. I believe, this is what I get from, okay, I get that he's sort of a fourth ray personality under Scorpio, a fifth ray mind. He's a sixth ray soul that changed to the second ray when he's writing the letters to the Hebrews, and he's going through this big transition at the third degree. He's a fifth ray submonad, head of the fifth ray ashram as a Chohan, and he's an absolute first ray monad on the highest level, taking the kingdom of heaven by storm. And from that point of view, we need to know how the higher rays are configured in order to see the history of a man like that. That he is a first ray monad, I have no doubt. But he's the head of the fifth ray ashram because the fifth sub-ray of the monad allows him to do that. Yes, Michael. Yes, and bring it over to him. Please, Michael. Michael got it. Okay, you got one. Yes.
I think you mentioned earlier that Jesus and the Christ, that duality, Jesus then came back at the point of kicking out the money changers in the temple.
Oh, I'm saying that it's a question of going in and out of the body. Here's the body of Jesus, and that, you know, and he says, one day the gold and silver threads of the Christ Jesus story will be untangled. So in other words, sometimes Christ is in the Jesus body, sometimes Jesus is coming back into his own body. And he's quite a violent character in certain respects. He's the great general, we're told. He's had a lot of sixth ray and first ray too. And this is different from the Christ.
So which one or both of them was crucified?
Jesus was crucified and the Christ was overshadowing him, taking the sixth initiation simultaneously, penetrating the darkness of the divine will. As Krishna, Christ had been crucified. He'd been shot full of arrows. You know how it goes back in the beginning of the Kali Yuga, around 3000 BC, 3002 BC, beginning of the Kali Yuga, the death of Krishna. That was Lord Maitreya, that was the Christ. And he had done that bit, okay? Heavy bit. And then now it was Jesus' turn to be crucified in that way, give up his life, give up his body, but the Christ is taking a higher initiation, overshadowing him at the same time. This is what occultism tells us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the fourth.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus takes the fourth, Christ takes the sixth.
Right, but I was talking about the Krishna.
Krishna takes the fourth.
Oh, okay, I thought you said.
And Buddha, now this is one of my pet theories, right? Can't justify it. Prince Siddhartha and Buddha are not the same. Okay? Prince Siddhartha is like Jesus was to Christ, so Prince Siddhartha was to the real Buddha. The real Buddha uses his body. The real Buddha has been head of the spiritual hierarchy since 3000 BC. Head of the spiritual hierarchy. He's not going to wander around in the woods wondering how to get enlightened. Okay? But he can use the body of his disciple, Siddhartha, to take the sixth initiation under the Bodhi tree and make a touch of cosmic mind. It doesn't make sense to me otherwise. The Buddha was already the head of the hierarchy and gave it over to the Christ in 500 or so AD, BC. So, you know, he doesn't need to do all that over again. It's just the same thing. The advanced disciple offers his body to the master or to the high initiate.
I was wondering about Plato. We know about Pythagoras. Well, what about Plato?
Well, I'm wondering about Plato too. But I think it's a combination of, Pythagoras to me is a combination of the second and the second ray. This is how I think of it. Pythagoras, second ray monad, Christ, second ray monad. Pythagoras, second ray soul, Christ, second ray soul. Buddha, third ray monad, second ray soul. Master Decay, third ray monad, second ray soul. Plato, third ray monad, second ray soul. And so this is how I think of it. I might be wrong. But I believe that there could be quite a connection with Decay and Plato.
Did you ever hear that Zoroaster or Zarathustra was actually in Jesus's was an ego, like before 12 years old, before some transformation took place, that it was
I don't know
Zoroaster?
Zarathustra's years.
No.
I know he's a fire philosopher, a Persian fire philosopher, and obviously an initiate. I don't know his line.
I think Steiner talks about that, something.
Well, all this research will be done, and we will know the story. And we'll know the story about ourselves, too, you know? That not quite so interesting, perhaps, but we'll know the story. Yeah, Chuck.
Oh, do you think there's any truth to the possibility that we've all at some time or another been each other's mother? And that part of our gathering,
it feels like it.
So part of this gathering is to undo some of our quantum entanglements.
Well, I'll tell you what. You know who should have tackled that question? A mathematician. A mathematician dealing with X number of billion monads in so many years could figure out whether it's statistically possible for that to occur. I wouldn't hazard a guess. But I really hope not. I mean, it's a daunting thing to think about who your parents might be next time around. God, could they be in this room? I mean, well, strange things happen, but probably we have a better perspective on the inside about how that should all work out. The Eskimos go to the young couple and say, "Can I be your child?" They have that tradition. And maybe that really works for them, you know? We don't kind of like do that yet, but I know some people who kind of do that. There's what? Look
at the Tudors.
The Tudors. Oh, the pictures of, you mean the English Tudors?
Well, the lineage of the kingship and queenship.
Oh, okay.
Of England.
So you think so, that there's some of that?
Oh, yeah, they come back.
I went to the Hans Holbein portrait exhibit in New York, and it was marvelous, the pictures of all those people. He painted them, They did look some of them quite similar. So anyway, all right. It's been a long day, and the days will get longer. So we're about ready to begin the conference. Tomorrow? Oh, no. Well, that's here. This is still the pre-conference. Still room to breathe. But then there's an immediate transition into the full conference by tomorrow night. Oh, boy. Yeah, it's okay. You're just doing what other people are thinking. Let's have our final mantram. And then we'll all go home. It's not far away. Om before, Om after. May the power of the one life pour through the group of all true servers. May the love of the one soul characterize the lives of all who seek to aid the great ones. May we fulfill our part in the one work through self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, and right speech. So have a very good night's sleep, and just as a special gift for you, no homework tonight. Okay, and we'll see you at 8:30 in the morning. See you at 8:30 in the morning. Okay. Hey. My goodness.